Digo, dijo, dicho, dije, dile. Why does the verb decir have such weird conjugations? And how are you ever going to know the right one to use? Sure, the verb decir is a very irregular verb with over 50 forms, but the good news is that most of the time, native Spanish speakers only use 10 of them. In this video, I'll walk you through each essential form of decir. Also, throughout this video, I'm going to quiz you with these shuffled flashcards, so that way you have to try to choose the right version of decir, just like in real life when you don't know what to expect. By the end of the video, you'll be choosing the right form of decir like a native Spanish speaker. Let's start with just a list of the top 10 forms of decir. We chose these words based on a frequency analysis of Spanish spoken by native Spanish speakers. According to this analysis, there are 500 words that make up over 65% of all words spoken in Spanish. And that list of 500 words includes only 10 forms of decir. Those forms include 4 present tense forms, 3 past tense forms, the infinitive, the participle, and an imperative. To jump in and start practicing these, we're actually going to do something a little bit unusual. We're going to start with the past tense. That's because unlike most common verbs, decir is used more often in the past than in the present. And that's because of how often we talk about what someone said in the past. For example, I said that yesterday. Or he said those things. Or you already said that. So let's look at these 3 past tense forms of decir. The word for I said is dije. The word for he or she said is dijo. And the word for you said is dijiste. Of course, there are other past tense forms, but they don't make it to the top 10, so we'll focus on these 3. Let's throw these into those simple sentence examples. I said that yesterday. Yo dije eso ayer. He said those things. Él dijo esas cosas. You already said that. Tú ya dijiste eso. Now let's practice this. So I'm going to shuffle up 3 of our flashcards, and your job is to see if you can predict which form of decir to use in each example. First, you said that yesterday. Tú dijiste eso ayer. I already said that. Yo ya dije eso. She said those things. Ella dijo esas cosas. All right, let's keep practicing these 3 past tense forms of decir, but we're going to stretch them a little bit further. The verb decir is used in lots of different ways, especially in the past tense. Half the time, instead of being translated as to say, it's instead translated as to tell. For example, let's look again at these 3 sentences that we looked at earlier. I said that yesterday. Yo dije eso ayer. He said those things. Él dijo esas cosas. You already said that. Tú ya dijiste eso. Okay, now let's change them all slightly. I told you that yesterday. Yo te dije eso ayer. He told her those things. Él le dijo esas cosas. You already told me that. Tú ya me dijiste eso. So wait a minute, what's the difference between said and told? And why are they different verbs in English, but the same verb in Spanish? Well, let's start by looking at the first sentence. I said that yesterday. In this case, I'm emphasizing what I said, that. But I'm not specifying who I said this to. But when we change it to, I told you that yesterday, I'm mentioning whom I said it to, you. In these cases, in English, we tend to say told rather than said. And also notice that in the Spanish versions of these sentences, there's only one change. It's the little word right before the conjugation of decir. So we have te dije, le dijo, and me dijiste. These tiny words are what we call indirect objects, and you can subscribe to this channel for an upcoming video on this subject. For now, we're going to use indirect objects to help us use decir to mean tell rather than say. We'll focus on using me to mean me, te to mean you, and le to mean him or her. I'm going to leave this list showing, and then we're going to use them in a few examples. So first of all, how would we say this in Spanish? I said something. Well, in this case, I didn't mention who I told this to, I just said it. So this is simply, yo dije algo. But what about this one? I told her something. In this case, we're mentioning who we told something to, so we'll use one of these indirect objects, specifically le for her, and the le goes right before the verb, so we get yo le dije algo. Next, how about this one? I told you the truth. In this case, we know we need one of these little indirect object pronouns because we said told rather than said. And in this case, it's you, which is te. And the te goes right before dije. So we have yo te dije la verdad. Let's get a little more practice with all of this. So I'm going to shuffle up some flashcards to practice the past tense forms of decir. And some of these will say told, and you'll have to use indirect objects with them, and others won't. So try to predict the Spanish. How would you say, you said that? Tú dijiste eso. She told me something. Ella me dijo algo. I told you those things. Yo te dije esas cosas. He said that. Él dijo eso. You told him something else? ¿Tú le dijiste algo más? Alright, next let's take a look at 4 present tense forms of decir that you'll use all the time. The word for I say is digo. The word for he or she says is dice. You say is dices, and they say is dicen. And of course, it's important to point out that these can also mean I tell, he or she tells, you tell, and they tell. Now, when is it that we're going to use the present tense forms of decir? Well, check out this sentence in English. He always says those things. So this is something we do once in a while. We use the present tense to describe something that happens frequently or something that happens all the time. So this would be siempre dice esas cosas. As another example, sometimes I tell her that. A veces le digo eso. So in this case, we're using the word tell, and we're also using an indirect object. Let's get a little bit of practice with flashcards that use these present tense forms of decir. See if you can fill in the blank with the right form of decir, as well as an indirect object when that's relevant. I say that every day. Yo digo eso todos los días. You always tell me that. Siempre me dices eso. Does he tell you that? Él te dice eso? Sometimes they say those things. A veces dicen esas cosas. All right, our next form to work on is the infinitive decir. This is what we call an unconjugated form, which means that it doesn't change based on who it's referring to. The simplest way to practice this is along with the verb querer, which means to want. So if we want to say, I want to say that, we would say, yo quiero decir eso. Now let's change the person from I to maybe they. So to say, they want to say that, it would be, ellos quieren decir eso. And then to say, you want to say that, we say, tú quieres decir eso. In each case, the word decir doesn't change. A similar word is dicho. This means said, and this is what we call the participle of the verb decir. A participle is kind of like a past tense form, but it doesn't change based on who did the thing. Here are a couple of examples. I have said many things. Yo he dicho muchas cosas. She has said that before. Ella ha dicho eso antes. Notice how these two sentences are different from the normal past tense. So we could say, I said many things, but instead this is, I have said many things. Similarly, with the second sentence, we could have said, she said that before, but we instead say, she has said that before, which has a slightly different meaning. Let's get some practice with both decir and dicho with some of our flashcards. First example, I want to say thank you. Quiero decir gracias. I have said this before. Yo he dicho esto antes. She has said something. Ella ha dicho algo. You want to say goodbye? ¿Quieres decir adiós? To wrap up, let's move on to imperatives, which are commands. This is how you'll tell someone to say something. The simplest version is di. So for example, say something. Di algo. But it's actually not so common to use di by itself. Instead, remember what we said earlier in the video about say versus tell. When you're telling someone to say something, it's much more common to phrase it as tell me something or tell her something. So you're going to need one of these strange words. Tell me is dime, and tell him or her is dile. If those endings look familiar, it's because they're exactly the same as two of our indirect object pronouns, which we covered earlier in the video. So dime and dile are just di, but then with le or me at the end. So here are some examples. Tell her something. Dile algo. Tell me what you did today. Dime qué hiciste hoy. Let's get some flashcard practice with dile and dime. Tell me your name. Dime tu nombre. Tell her the answer, please. Dile la respuesta, por favor. Tell him that we are here. Dile que estamos aquí. Ready to get even better at this? We have a set of 40 flashcards that you can download for free, and it includes all of the examples from this video and even more. Click the link on the description of this video so that you can download these free flashcards and get some active practice with all of the most common uses of the verb decir. And then for some fun ways to use flashcards like these, you'll want to look at our videos about how to use Spanish flashcards. Just subscribe to this channel and you'll get lots more grammar and study tips that'll get you speaking Spanish fluently faster than ever.